Rebecca, all right, here we go. Yay, recording. My name is Mackenzie Wren. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Special Projects Manager for Sojourn, the Southern Jewish Resource Network for Gender and Sexual Diversity. We were founded in 2001 as the Rainbow Center, initially supported by the Jewish Federation of Greater Atlanta and coming out of both Congregation Bet Havarim and Jewish Family and Career Services. And we became Sojourn in 2013 and have been doing work to walk alongside on the journey to full inclusion across the South. And I'm so excited to be here tonight with Shosh and Puck. So without further ado, so that we can get on going, I'm going to start by introducing Shosh. So move my refine with Gemini. No, Shosh Manek is a lover of community, Jewish practice, and reclaiming ritual. Shosh is a rabbinic student at Aleph, a Jewish renewal ordination program, and supports a small Jewish community in New Orleans, Kol Halev, as the rabbinic intern. As someone still defining their personal prayer practice, they want to hold hands with others as we wrestle with God language, patriarchal prayers, and the concept of chosenness. Shosh believes Jewish technology is one approach to the divine and that all humans are inherently deserving of connection. And they are working to disrupt who and how we get access to our Jewishness and consider themselves a student of the world above all else. And Shosh is also joined by Puck Glass, who is a co-founder of Makom Shelanu. They are a rabbinical student at the Jewish Theological Seminary of America. They love planning worship, teaching at all levels, and are passionate about social justice issues. They serve as a facilitator for conversations around LGBTQIA+, inclusion, disability, and racial equity. Puck has a background in music and loves to play both in worship and their spare time, and just recently did a super badass concert that raised a lot of money for trans families in Texas. Puck also loves drinking tea, reading books, and playing with their cat, Patsy. So let's get started. So Shosh, tell us a little bit about who you are.
Hi, everyone. I'm Shosh. Mackenzie, thank you so much for opening up this space. Thank you, Sojourn, for having us here. I'm just going to invite everyone to take a big breath in and a big breath out. We just land here together. I'm Shosh. I use they, them pronouns. I've been in Bulbancha, the indigenous name for New Orleans, which means land of many tongues, for almost 9 years. And I, love Judaism. And so I'm on this path of becoming a rabbi through the Aleph ordination program. And I love being queer. So I'm on this joined path of what does it mean to be someone who is in radical, meaningful community that creates spiritual spaces with others. And so a few years ago, a community started Kol Halev here in New Orleans, and I joined as a community member. In the last 3 years, I became more active as a board member, and then now I'm the rabbinic intern, and it's all very exciting. And a lot of what we talk about is how to make Jewish prayer and ritual and space meaningful and adaptive and personal and yet collective. And I think about these things a lot for my own personal practice, for community practice. And so I'm really excited to be here in this conversation. So
Beautiful. Welcome, Shosh. Puck, bring your voice in.
I'm so excited to be with you all tonight. I love you're the special projects manager, Mackenzie, which means that we're a special project. And so, yeah, I am calling from Hoboken, which is the land of the Lenni Lenape people, meaning the land of the tobacco pipe. I'm in Hoboken because I teach here, although I split my time usually between New York City, where I'm in school, and Fort Worth, Texas, where I help lead a congregation that I co-founded with Sherry Allen, who's on this call, Cantor Sherry Allen. I consider myself a thinker, an activist, and a journeyer, and I hope that my rabbinic work sits at the intersection of those things. Um, like many, my journey to rabbinic studies has not been a straight path, but also I'm not straight, so I'm fine with that. And along the way, I've also stopped and taught and learned and carried tidbits of wisdom from lots of places, from my life as a musician, as an educator in public schools, and also as at my attempted education as a would-be pastor, but I converted to Judaism before I finished that. And I did mention that my journey to rabbinic studies was unconventional. And in conjunction with queer Jewish life, I care deeply about disability advocacy. This leads me to practices both within and beyond Judaism that call for a hermeneutic of love, or in other words, an understanding that things don't need to be exact if they are harmful. And I argue that we have a responsibility not to perpetuate things that are harmful when options based in love or at a minimum understanding are possible. I love books and tea and Dungeons and Dragons. I like hiking and scenery and just enough adventure. I love my cat, days with no meetings, and for some reason, Texas. And I'm excited to be in conversation tonight and discuss ritual with you all, discuss the ways that we can look backwards, look forwards, and yeah, I'm excited to be here with you all.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all. This is something very near and dear to my heart as well. Passionate about prayer and meaningful prayer, and how do we modify and expand the boundaries of Judaism while also remaining true to our roots. So we're talking about marking moments in queer Jewish life. Puck and Shosh and I had an amazing conversation last week where we talked a lot about these things, and an hour is going to not be long enough to hear all these juicy things that we talked about. But I wanted to start with asking each of them to share a meaningful ritual that you have done for yourself or for others. And how did you modify it or adapt it for your identity or for the identity of the person you were working with? And Puck, do you want to give it a go first?
Yeah, so recently I got to do a bat mitzvah for a young lady who is also a trans person. And part of this bat mitzvah also required the giving of a name. How do you call someone to the Torah who first doesn't have a Hebrew name? And also, if she had one, the name that was given to at her birth probably would not have been the way that she would have wanted to be called to the Torah. Ooh, the desk is tipping. um, and so getting to do something like give a Hebrew name to not a baby, I think is really meaningful, because that person gets to be an active participant in choosing how they want to be known among us, which I think is so much of what like being queer and out is, right? Is saying like to the world, this is how I want to be known in a community. Um, and then getting to like go through the process of exploring with her the the choosing of her name, how she would arrive at it, what it meant to her, reflecting to her uh, exactly what I saw of her in the name that she chose, like in front of her gathered family and friends. These many things that are like actually so normal, right? Like they're so everybody. We do this for every kid, but to do it in the context of someone who's trans means that they're getting seen in a way that maybe society doesn't always see them, right? In a way that is like I think intensely special, um, because you spend your so much of your life like thinking, is this how it's going to be for a young person who is more recent on their journey, to be known a certain way among a community? I think is really a beautiful thing. And so I say that because it's also so regular. We made it what it was because we got to call her by her, right? By exactly how she how she was, how she wanted to be. So the question was sort of right, like how did we change the ritual? Well, we changed it a little bit because it's not usual to give someone a Hebrew name at a bat mitzvah. Usually, right? You jump to the calling to them, and we changed the part where we gave her a name so that we could call her, and doing almost 2 rituals in one for the day, which is lovely. But at the same time, it's there's also something that's not changeable about that at all. It's a very regular thing. So.
Awesome. Thanks, Puck. Shosh, how about for you?
One of a simple queering of ritual that I've done, if I'm not leading Shabbat services on Friday night, I'm having people around my table, and often the folks around my table are queer. And we go through the blessings and we get to the blessing for the child. And I've invited in, when people feel comfortable, to, instead of reciting what's on the page, to allow folks to think about their inner child and to think about when they were a queer kid, what were the words and blessing that they would have wanted to hear, and then to offer that to the table, and for us all to be able to say Amen together, so that we get to witness each other in becoming the blessing in which we are, and using this like traditional, like there is a space for a blessing over the child, like it is in the liturgy, there is a moment for that, and to hold that as not being like, because there are no children present, we'll just skip over it, but to really think about, how can I use this liturgy that exists here? How can I use this blessing that exists here and actually adapt it to the people who are in the room in a way that's going to be meaningful for everyone present?
Thank you both. When you think about queering Judaism, part of the conversation is who gets to decide, like what gets kept and what gets changed, and how do we make those decisions, right? And so I would love to have you both talk to each other about that. And you all have slightly different perspectives on that as well, which I think is absolutely wonderful. And so whoever wants to start first, when you think about that, making choices about what kind of stays and is traditional and what gets expanded, and how you go about making those choices. So Shosh, you want to kick us off?
One of the things I think about when I think about queering Judaism is that there is an essence to Judaism that is queer. I think that spiritual spaces become meaningful because there is something lacking, and people find ways to create inroads to spirituality. And that at the time when Judaism, in the way that we got passed down, was being cultivated and created, there was this like queering of it that happens. The organization Svara speaks really beautifully about this, of that like the rabbis in themselves were queer. And so when I think about what would be meaningful now, I think about this deep lineage of not being afraid to change things, but knowing where the roots come from, and really approaching Judaism for just like beyond the queer community of what is going to be meaningful to people and what's really going to bring out the spiritual connection for all of us through this Jewish lineage, but in a way that is radical and different.
Shosh, I love that you started by being like, I don't know, but Judaism and queer, because when I read the question Mackenzie sent, the first thing I wrote was, I don't know, but Judaism is so queer. So I love you started in the same place. And then I sort of also asked the question, well, how did I get to that answer? Like it so quickly came, I don't know, but Judaism's queer. That I started to ask, well, what even is queer now? Does it mean different nowadays? Does it mean like gay and therefore like the joyful connotation? Like, what do we even mean by the way we're using the word queer anymore? And so I also went through some of the very conversations you just shared. And so I love that we both sort of had that space. And first, I want to say that I don't particularly care how it changes or who changes it, as long as it's us. I really don't want it to be like cis straight white men in a room deciding how it's going to work for us. As long as we are doing it, I think that there can be a lot of right answers, and my answers are not going to look like Shosh's in many instances. Um, but I love Shosh's answers, and I'm so excited to see what they are and to like have them on the table as like, you know, part of the options for things I can choose. Um, I just don't want any more people contributing to the answers who have like kind of caused the problem. um, so yeah, but I am constantly torn between like rejecting everything and saying, let's start again. Um, these things worked for a period of time and let's throw it all away, because now we're here and we get to define what all of these things mean for us, what rituals mean in our time. And very often drawn towards, they're here. How can we repurpose them? How can we say, this is what it meant in its time? And then to use a Talmudic term, hakika amar, right? It meant this, but actually I want to give it a new meaning. So I'm going to attach a new thing to it, hakika amar, and say, here's the new meaning I'm giving it. And so that is something that I am currently playing with most in my own understanding. For example, I did a set of blessings for Hanukkah over the last year, and the ending to each of the nights, it was pride related, but also like just you should look at yourself and know yourself and celebrate yourself, celebrate the others around you. That was kind of the theme of the whole thing. And it ended with a blessing for that you say for seeing people who are different than you. Does that blessing belong in Hanukkah? I don't know. Plenty of people might argue no, right? Like it doesn't belong there, but it belongs there because I said it did, and I gave it a reason to. It is repurposed because like we can do that, and so that is something that I'm interested in, is how we can take something that is from a different place, or reattach a new verse to it, put it on a new, hang it on a new hook, in order to give it a new context, give it a new reason for it to be part of our canon in a way that feels authentic to queer folks.
Look, you're at JTS, which is the conservative movement, and I am curious how you work within those parameters. Some of us just had the opportunities to see the movie Sabbath Queen. If you haven't seen it, see it. Rabbi Amichai Lau Levi became a rabbi through JTS, and there was a lot of wrestling there. And I'm curious if you can talk a little bit for you, as a trans person and as somebody who's expansive in so many ways. How have you had to work with the guardrails or guidelines within JTS training?
Yeah, so there definitely are guardrails, and I am known to push against them. But actually, some of them I'm really fine with. Some of them I'm really happy to have because I'm a person who inherently likes rules. Right? I like that I know what time to light candles and what time I can do Havdalah. And I love having a boundary. Part of the reason I love having a boundary is so I can break it. Right? But a boundary kind of holds it. I want to know where the boundaries are. And then I want to say, like, you know what, that boundary isn't perfect for me. I want to do that. I want to move that. I want to do that. And then there are other times where I say, wow, that boundary does not feel like it's something that helps me, like move forward in my Judaism. I don't like that. I don't like that boundary. I don't want to define that. Like, I don't know, I'm a they, them human. Why? Because I don't like the boxes. So when the boundary is a guardrail that helps me move forward, like the gutters on a bowling alley, that's a good boundary. And when the boundary is a box that traps me, for me, that's not a good boundary. And that is when I say, okay, I am really, really, really pushing back here. And that's when I start to, I'm going to say get in trouble, but with real air quotes, because I think that there's a little bit of that expected. JTS has always moved forward. I think the conservative movement as a whole has always moved forward. I'm using forward, which is a contentious word in the moment, because it implies that where we are is not good. But for me forward towards the progress of including more humans um, in a very real way. So getting to do that has always happened by people who are like really pushing hard. And so I think that's also an expectation at JTS, that there will be people in the room always who are going to push hard and receive pushback, but like we're gonna do that. And so I am met sometimes with support and sometimes with a it's a chill on this one, just a little bit. um, and that's also good. I think that like having resistance in Judaism is not bad. Like we're made up of conversing and arguing with each other, and you don't win every argument. That's not how it works, right? So I make my voice known, and sometimes I lose, and sometimes teku, we let it stand and we move on, and sometimes they're like, oh, that would be an easy thing, and we could totally, consider that. Let's move forward and turn the box into a set of gutters. And so getting to play in that space, I think is good for me. Yeah.
Shosh, you had talked about naming the gaping holes in ritual and resources for queer communities. And I wonder if you will talk a little bit about some of those rituals. We had talked about, prayers for binding or prayers for hormones or top surgery and some of the other places where there may not be existing traditions or resources. Can you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah. It's interesting in Puck's response about saying that like I'll create something and Puck will create something. I also thought about like what it means to be in queering Judaism right now and how many spaces there are that are doing that, and thinking about that and how many more rituals and resources there are than there once were before. And I think in finding what's going to be meaningful to anyone in a given moment in transition periods of their life, like how we talked about getting to name someone at their bat mitzvah, how Puck brought that up. But like when a friend is going to get top surgery, what is the blessing for that moment? When someone has a name change that's on a legal document, but maybe they don't want to do their Hebrew name change, what does that moment look like? How are we really creating ritual that is going to be in connection with Judaism and with blessing, but specific to individuals and like with different offerings? And so that folks don't feel like I'm just being given another box of things that I don't feel like I fit into, or I don't feel Jewish enough for, or I don't feel like I'm being seen in this experience, but really thinking with someone of like, when you put your tape on, when you put your bind on, when you, whatever the thing is, what are you lifting up and what's the blessing of that? Like we have a blessing for going to the bathroom. Let's have a blessing for like the parts of our body that work the way they're supposed to work, even if we're told by society they're not correct.
And have you found yourself looking to, for example, that blessing for the openings and closings of your body that shall be in flow, etc. Are you finding yourself looking to those resources and modifying them, or coming up with something brand new, or some combination of both?
A combination of both. I want to know Hebrew so much better than I do, and I want to be able to like take old liturgy and adapt it. And I've like taken classes on the history of liturgy. I really turned towards the Siddur Shahar Zahav as like a point blank of like, where do I begin? And then I've also turned towards Rabbi Marsha Prager's book on blessing, of how do we like cultivate and create blessing. And then I've also turned towards my gut, like, what is a blessing that just flows out of me? And is that the right offering for someone in the moment? And being humble enough to like accept a no. If like someone's like, no, that blessing does not land for me. And being in like healthy enough relationship that people feel comfortable to say that. And so really coming to people when they're in a moment and not assuming that anybody wants a blessing or wants a marker of Jewish, like even if that is the context of our relationship. I've had friends who it's post top surgery and we're sitting together and I'm like, do you want some Jewish text? Is that something that would be meaningful for you? And making sure that there are, like, I enjoy going to ritualwell.com and looking at resources. I enjoy going to Safaria. I enjoy reading these books. I'm not going to assume that my community members enjoy doing those things. And I'm also not going to assume that they don't. If they want to go find their own, that is a resource that I can like connect them to.
Beautiful. And you, if I remember correctly, you said you mostly create in English first, and that's where your real expansion comes in, is in English, right?
Yeah, so I really enjoy taking a prayer and playing with the structure that is in Hebrew, but really inserting or not even inserting. I know English. English is the language that like I grew up with. It's the language that's on my brain. It's what I dream in. And why I have this dream of knowing Hebrew better, a lot of my community members never will. And so like also making English not this scary thing to pray in, and not making it in like, I think it can feel so Christian because we haven't had the like practice of how to Jewishly pray in English, and really like giving myself that ability. And so an example would be like early on in like my own ritual practices, I wanted to like make a morning blessing based off of the Modani, but I didn't want to wake up yet and say the Modani every day. And I was really into Thich Nhat Hanh at the time. And I was like, what is the way to blend the smiles that can be on our faces and the breath that I'm thanking God for, but make it my own?
So let's pivot to language, in particular Hebrew, because there's a lot more options than there ever have been before. And as someone who does not speak Hebrew and loves both feminized Hebrew and the Hebrew that's been offered up through the Non-Binary Hebrew Project, and have been seeing more and more integration of language and words replacing Malcha, Melech, king, with Malka, queen, or what is it? It's Malchatet. Is that what it is? Yeah,
Malchutet.
Malchutet, right. So sovereign. So it's the king, it's the queen, it's the sovereign, and you have options there. And then, really working with this very, very gendered language, working with the Hebrew aspect. So I'm curious how that has landed for you, and whether you use any of those options, or you really kind of stick with the kind of standard Baruch Atah Adonai, and if so, why? So Puck, you want to kick us off first?
Yeah. So currently I'm firmly in the Baruch Atah Adoshem formula. And that doesn't mean I won't use, if someone else has written a thing that I find beautiful, I'm happy to bring it in, right? Like if someone loves using Ruach HaOlam and, spirit of the world, let's party. I would love to use their prayer still. I'm not an exclusionist when it comes to it, but I do firmly lean towards using a traditional blessing formula. And that also comes from like as a non-binary person, I am not going, Hebrew is hard. Hebrew is hard. I have been struggling with it for years now, and getting better every day. But when I go to Israel, I currently in spoken language have to choose between who and he, between masculine and feminine. And until Israel has a really good spoken option for gendering me when I walk into a place, then I'm not going to mess with trying to gender God, right? That there's like, I'm sure that Israel will get there, and many, like, first native language speakers of Hebrew, we will get there. There are enough of us pushing for there to be some kind of something. But I'm not gonna push for that, because I'm not gonna learn this language more than once and in more than one way. So when there's some time to something to add on, then I will happily add on. And until then, I'm gonna stick with the regular formula. And I think part of that too is like my insistence that like, okay, God is pretty cool, so don't understand me differently when I say this, but like, so am I. And there's a little bit of God in me too, right? There's a spark there. And if we can't gender me, then how dare I think that I can figure out how to gender God? So, right. So I think that there has to be some work with that. That being said, that is for Hebrew. So when we translate to English, that my community and in many of my own personal writings, translating to English is done with so much care. To not use masculine language and to not use like Lord language or king language, kingdom language. That is masculine for many maybe obvious reasons, and also some of the lord and kingdom language from our especially Black siblings who are rejecting some of that language and other traditions. Um, so we're really careful to not gender God in a translation. So while we leave the Hebrew gendered, for many of our congregants that even as Shosh spoke about that are not native Hebrew people, like in our language, we should really be careful about how we do that and invite an expansive view of a more expansive view of God in English.
Shosh.
One of the things that I've loved the most about being in Renewal Jewish Spaces is the way that people play with gendered language when they go up for blessings, when they say the Shema. And I thought there was a point in my own practice where I started saying Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Shechina Echad. And I was like, I'm the only one who's ever done this. Like, this is so edgy. And then I got to a place where it's so normal. And I was like, right, because there's so many different names for the divine. And at some point, we lost relationship with a lot of those names. And I am expansive. What I want to be called in different relationships and different moments shifts and changes. And what I see and how I connect to the divine aspect, I want to be able to shape shift as well. And there's a practical aspect of like, what do I do in my personal practice and what do I do when I'm leading a space? Because I've noticed if I try to lead a space and shift up language, there's a discomfort that can happen in the room because there's also a like knowledge of how these words have been said and chanted for so long. And so I think really holding the like tension of how do we make enough space to play with language? How do we create communities that are comfortable with doing that? And how do we also respect and honor the like words that have been said over and over and over again and the own like the portal that exists within that? But I'm totally like a Jew who loves like saying Ruach and saying Havaya. And like it just, there's something about not feeling narrowness around the name of the divine. And then now that I'm learning a little bit more, I'm like, oh, and I could say Adonai, but like say a feminine word before that. And like that's like blurring the lines of gender. And I don't think it's not like expressing a I know, but I think it's expressing a what could this shape shift to be and how can I also tap back into what was and not saying I'll never pray a traditional shachari, but giving myself the expansive relationship to try things on and inviting others to do so as well.
Really appreciate that piece about what is familiar to the congregation and how, if there is exploration, how does the congregation do that together rather than having it imposed? And I think that that's a lot of what's happening in conversation right now is maybe there is a place where people can have their private prayers or their personalized languages, but as a whole, using these familiar language and or slowing it down so that the space is brave enough to try out some new language and not just trying to shove it into the regular rhythm, but actually like slowing things down. And yeah, go ahead, Shosh.
And I was going to say, and like trying on, can both things exist at the same time? And really seeing like, can there be space for people saying the traditional language, why other people are saying saying something different and something new. And I'm thinking specifically because Amy's here of something we tried recently where there were people chanting the traditional Amidah and there were people meditating on an interpretive Amidah that I had written and created. And that idea of with language, how do we make it accessible to everyone in the room to pray in the way that they want to pray?
Yeah, absolutely.
I also think that we're like, especially when it comes to gendering God and naming God, like God has 70 faces, our tradition says, and I think that that's a start. I think that's a minimum. And so if we know that to be true, like what are the ways that we name God and know that that's like expansive? but also what do our texts tell us about who God is and what is God doing in a particular moment or particular time? I don't translate God's name the same in every passage, right? Like in some Psalms, I have one Psalm, like for Psalm 92, I translate God as like the one who renews or the renewer, right? Because that is who God is and what God is doing for me in that version of that translation of that passage, right? There are times that I want God in a passage, and I think God is revealing God's self to be a shepherd. There are other times I think God is is demonstrating God's self to be right a parent figure, sometimes female, sometimes more male, identified. Like, how do we look at what God is doing and name God in the context of our texts, in the context of our prayers, and then like write that in as we're doing this? Apply that to our blessings, apply that to all our ritual. What is happening, and what are the ways that we're naming God and gendering God around the things that are happening? And so I think that like we don't also have to come up with this like off the top of our brain. Sometimes I think context helps us or tradition helps us, and that we can use those things to imagine a fuller understanding of who God is, how God works, and which one of the minimum of 70 faces we're seeing.
Want to take a moment and remove some spotlights and see what questions there may be from those of you all who are here. What's on your mind? What are you thinking about? What might you want to ask Shosh Puck about queering moments in Judaism or marking moments? Or even a reflection? So think of some questions. If they come to you, that's great. If they don't, that's okay too. One of the things that we talked about was how do queer-centered rituals invite more people in? And you kind of touched on that a little bit already. Let's talk about that. Like, how do queer-centered rituals invite more people in? Whoever of you wants to go first.
So I would say any ritual that I help cultivate is a queer ritual because have a queer lens when I am approaching it. And I had the honor of my older brother had a baby. I had a nephew, and they are very much people who are like, we don't like God. We are both culturally Jewish, but we don't have any relationship to it. Will you help us have a non-traditional bris? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. I have made so many different kinds of ritual for my community that being able to meet you where you're at is something that I feel really capable of doing. And I think in this experience of cultivating queer ritual and noticing what is left out and what is not in the room invites everyone in. I think we're in a moment right now, and I am in the moment of existence that I am in, and this could be for everyone all the time. But there's a lot of Jews who don't feel Jewish enough, and feel like they are not accepted in how they practice or in how they relate to Judaism, and don't feel like they have the ability to like claim it. And I'm really interested in queering ritual to say this is for everyone, and we can make it so Jewish and so full and so filled with community and accessible to other people that you can come in, and even if your spiritual practice looks different, you can find meaning here without us sacrificing any of our Jewishness for it. And I think there's something in the ability to really queer something. I spoke a little bit about this earlier, but it's to push against what you spoke about, Puck, those white cis men who are standing in a room making choices. And it's not that everything is going to land, but it's that we're trying on things all the time, and we're finding where our edges are, and we're not afraid to make things our own. And that allows other people to do that as well.
Sure. So it feels so alive in so many ways. And the way that you said, I'm queer. So like everything is queer. right? And there is a thing that I've been hearing through a through line in my community is like, what makes something Jewish? Well, if a Jew is doing it, it's Jewish, right? And that there's those questions around what makes something queer, what makes something Jewish, and how do our identities and perspectives inform that thing? So I want to come back to that in a moment, but I want to give Puck a chance to also respond to same question around that aspect of how do queer-centered rituals invite more people in, unless you want to go in a different direction, Puck, in which case you're welcome to.
Yeah, so I think that queer-centered rituals invite people in because I'm thinking like there are so many queer folks who are not in a synagogue right now. And I think part of that is because it's not been friendly, right? It's not like their stories are not being told there. I think that is changing. But I think also in order for people to know that, they have to give it a shot, which like is a hard thing to do, right? If it's not what you're imagining and whatever, it's hard to like walk back in and think like this place will value my story, will value me, and I will hear my story reflected here. Um, that's a lot, right? You have to be pretty vulnerable to do that. Um, but I think that so many people today have so many identities where they're thinking that, right? Like we're talking from a queer lens, but there's so many identities that people hold where like, am I gonna hear myself reflected? Am I going to find a community here that is going to accept me the way that I see myself, the way that I hold myself? This can be the same for interfaith families. It can be the same for Jews of color. It can be the same for people with disabilities, right? There's so many communities who are wondering, am I going to walk into this place and get what I need here? To be spiritually fulfilled, to have a community, to not be othered, right? And so when I'm thinking about creating queer ritual, like I am trying to hold all of that, right? Who's not in the room? Um, and what am I doing that sets a longer table, right? That says like, here we are, we're gonna try a thing. The thing might not work, like Sho said. It might not work, the thing might not work. We're gonna try a thing, it's spaghetti on a wall, and some things will stick. And maybe some other people will come too. Maybe some people who are already in the room will see themselves differently because we told a story in a way that was expansive, because we retold a story in a way that was expansive. And as we do those retellings and as we do those sharings, um, we get new ideas, new people who understand themselves in the context of their Judaism in a new way. So I think that anytime that we're creating today, so much of what we're doing is thinking about who's here, who is not here, what is the gap between those two things, um, to make people feel comfortable in our spaces and like not only comfortable, but fully celebrated in our spaces. And I think for me, the goal of creating for queer ritual is for people to know that they are fully celebrated, right? That like we see this moment as a invitation to full celebration. Um, so yeah, I think that if we're doing that for some people, we should do it for all people, and those trickle around, right? Not every ritual has to be giant. Shows your back. I was kind of talking, waiting for you. I see you. So not every ritual has to be giant. Some of them can be, right? Like getting called to the Torah after a smaller thing, right? And instead of benching like, Birkat Gomel, right, which is a smaller blessing upon a return of right journeying, like what is it to do that after like, receiving your first binder, right? Like we're going to do this small celebration so that then the person who receives their first mobility aid, right, also says, I want to celebrate that too, right? Like there's so many ways that we can start to make small transitions that celebrate people where they are in their own lives. And I think that that's like an important way that we can start to bring people together.
One of the things that I loved, and I do not remember which of you said this, but we talked about the B'nai Mitzvah process, and there's a way in which queer Jews come into themselves that is a way in which all people come into themselves, and how do you ensure that space for investigation within that process for all people? Don't remember, can't remember who that was, or either of you can comment on that, and how is that relevant to, everyone's experiences?
Yeah, so feel really lucky to have done several B'nai Mitzvah recently, all a little strange in the most beautiful ways. Some connected to our community, some people that found our community because they needed a community. They did not have one because of things that are happening in the world, because young queer people, because are in the world and need a community to do places. Right. So I feel really lucky to have been a part of the journey of learning. And also I'm even working with college students now. And so I think whether like 12, 11, 12, 13, or young people out in the world for the first time, getting to make their own decisions for like real. And this can equally apply to adults, like getting to start to decide how you want to grow into yourself, how you want the community to celebrate you, right? We have a thing at Makom Shalanu that we do not require our young people to give a sermon, for example. Most of them have chosen to give a sermon to Drosh, but if that person would feel so much more excited to make a comic strip of the Parsha because they're an artist and know that they are entering the Jewish community, and what they are offering the Jewish community that is celebrating them is like a way to tell the stories in an interesting and inviting way, then like they're announcing, here I am as community, this is what I have to offer. And the community gets to say in return, we're so excited, we see what you have to offer and how our community can like be different because of that, right? That's a beautiful thing. And I think if we allow our young adults to do that, if we allow our adults to do that, right, to do a learning process and start to imagine how they are and who they are in the context of the community, and how the community can be different because they're there, how the community can acknowledge their existence there in the way that is the most supportive, like that's incredible, right? Like what a gift we could give and what a gift we could receive by doing that. Um, so, like it's, yeah, I don't know. So the B'nai Mitzvah process for me, I think, can be so individualized. Part of the individualizing for me comes from like having people who have not fit the perfect box, having trans kids need a B'nai Mitzvah, having a kid whose families political identity does not align with other shuls and need a place to be, right? Like because they've been like queer as in the outsider, right? And needing to a place to be, like we get to create something. And if we can take that creation and make it not a standard one size fits all box, and make it a bowling alley, I'm going to stick with that metaphor. I kind of like it. Then I think that, we'd be interesting, right? Like, and our kids get to create their own siddur, right?
Yeah.
They get to do parts of things. They get to make their covers. They get to be a full part of everything. Why can't our adults do that? Why can't, like, I think the ritual process shouldn't be just me and Shosh and Mackenzie, right? It should be all of us. Like everyone in this room is gets to create ritual. So we let our 13-year-olds do it when we say which version of Elenu do you want to do? Which version of Adon Olam do you want to do? Right? Why does that stop? Why don't we get to continue to like do those moments? Yeah.
Great. Thanks. Shosh, do you want to weigh in on any of that particular question before we go to our beginnings of wrapping up?
Yeah, I agree with Puck. I was talking with someone who's thinking about having a bat mitzvah, and she's a very talented actress at her school and wants kids to be involved in it. And I was like, what if you directed your Parsha as a play? Just that there's these opportunities to really meet kids where they are. And I think so many people I know who grew up Jewish, when they reflect on their bar mitzvahs, it was kind of like this making or breaking point where a lot of people were like, Judaism isn't for me. I was like put in a pressure cooker. performing, and I didn't like being in front of people and having to chant in a language I didn't know. And if that's people's touch point and like their most like memorable experience often at that age, what are we doing and how can we do it differently? And I think learning from queer community, but and then I think like how Puck framed queer as being people on the edges who are really getting to play with different ways of approaching this, and then how to fold that in, and just that, yeah, B'nai Mitzvah, whenever it happens in your life, can be such a calling in and coming out to community as who you are in that moment in that community, and it can come again and again if that is meaningful for that person in their practice.
Absolutely. And of course, I'm sitting here thinking about my own bat mitzvah only 2 weeks ago. Very, very individual and unique and wonderful process. And, you know, like everybody should become a brit mitzvah at least every 13 years in their life or something. Like, why should it only happen once? Keep renewing the covenant. Okay, let's begin to move. And Shosh, I'd love to hear you for your closing remarks. Like this moment, as a queer Jew and marking moments in life, in queer Jewish life, what is your hope or your offering, or how would you like to see like Judaism move? I think is the reflection.
I'm feeling really pulled towards joy right now, that there needs to be more spaces for just intense joy, because when the world is weighted so heavy, we have to be able to celebrate and be with each other, and not in a way that is spiritually bypassing. Like I feel very aware and want to not promote that, but in little ways. I remember when I was a younger queer person and I was going to hear trans activists, and they were talking about how their heart knows to love them by pushing their blood, and that they can always come back to their heartbeat. And I think about that a lot. And for ritual creation, for prayer spaces, for Jewish queer community, plus whoever else wants to be a part of those spaces, I think really giving ourselves the right to try things on and to stumble and find the pleasure and joy in the stumbling as well in the successes.
Amen. Huck, how about for you?
Can you repeat the question one more time? I was listening so intently that I forgot.
Yes, how, you know, as we think about marking moments in queer Jewish life and and queering Judaism, if you will, how do you want to see Judaism move?
Yeah, I just want more of us to be visible, I think. Yeah, there are so many really cool humans and really cool queer humans doing really cool things. Um, and many times, many times we know each other, know of each other, and so many more times we don't, right? We're all like doing our own like sort of little things in our little parts of the world, and we're not visible to each other. That means we're also not visible to like so much of the community who and so much of the world who thinks like, oh, that's just this little thing that's happening in like this one little part of a space. Like, no, it's happening in New York, and it's happening in Los Angeles, and it's happening in Chicago where you expect it to. But it's also happening in Fort Worth, and it's happening in New Orleans, and it's happening in Baltimore, and it's happening in all of these places, right? And so like more visibility around, like there are people doing it in so many spaces you might not expect. And many times like it's hard to like do the work of learning all of this stuff and creating it, and then share it, right? And then like find a way to give it away so that everybody knows it exists. Ritual Well is a space, right? There's like a online resource, like one, right? There's more like popping up, but how do we make sure that like all of the things we're creating allows us to have a table where we can say, there are actually 6 options for name change things available, and this is the one that fits the human in front of me the best. And this is, the option for, a breed, and this is the option, right? Like that we can choose these things while that person's doing this really cool thing and I want to know about it. Some kind of community space so that we can collectively move Judaism that way and not in like disparate ways. Yeah.
So as we begin to close with these beautiful human beings, a couple of quick announcements. One is that if you are a queer Jewish professional working in Jewish spaces, we have a gathering that happens. Its next one is this Thursday. We'll drop a link in somewhere. It's called Queer Jewish Professionals. It's really a support group. It's like, wow, this times are hard, and let's come together and be supported as we move through the kind of whatever Jewish professional spaces that you find yourself in. Rebecca Staplewax, who is behind the rainbow star there, is going to drop an evaluation link in, and we would love to just get your thoughts on how did tonight land for you? Maybe what was one of your takeaways? And then finally, I just want to really appreciate Puck and Shosh. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and how you are emerging leaders in Judaism, and how beautiful that is, and how much space there is, and how wonderful it is that you are bringing out your voices and your mad skills. So everybody give it up for Shosh and for Puck. Thank you so much. And I see the poll quiz is here, so jump right on in and to do that small poll, right? Everybody got the poll? And I'm going to put
It was lovely to be with you all tonight. I'm so excited that I got to speak with you more, Shosh and Mackenzie, for moderating. It was beautiful, and so many people here also on the call. Thank you. I see a couple people in my community. Shout out. Hi. I'm excited to maybe see you this week too for things. And I am actually going to run because there are a group of college students that do want to learn some Torah from me coming up in this moment. And so I hope that we can chat again sometime. And Shosh, let's be in touch about like chatting in other formats.
Let's be connected. It's been so lovely to be connected to you and to be in this space and enjoy your Torah study with the students.
Hi, Puck. Great. Thank you all. For those of you who have participated, we'll leave it open. I'm going to